What? The guy who brought a big snake into class is going to do another presentation about reptiles? Who would have thought? Hi, today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite hobbies, which is herping. No, I'm not referring to the herpes virus, although it gets confused for that a lot. I'm referring to herpetology, which is the studies of amphibians or reptiles, like our friend Mussolini here, who is a leopard gecko. Where are you going? Herping is a rather outdoor hobby, so I thought instead of me just sitting here talking about it, all dull-like, we could go outside and I could show it. So why don't we go do that? So what is herping? Herping is a lot like, if you think about it in the sense of how birders go birding, they go out into nature with a specific goal to see birds. Herping is like that for people who study herpetology. So we go out and we look for things like amphibians such as frogs or salamanders, or we look for reptiles like snakes, turtles, and possible lizards depending on where you're living. Some of us who are trained to handle animals in the wild will also pick up these animals to check their health, to check the sexual population in that region, and to provide demonstrations to groups who haven't seen these animals before, like we might be doing today. Now, when I brought the snake into my first presentation, I noticed that a good 2/3 of the class was a little off-put by this animal, which is totally fine. That's not anything to be, kind of embarrassed about. Being afraid of snakes is an evolutionary trait, because if you think about it, back in the caveman days, the cavemen that probably handled snakes didn't make it because those snakes were venomous. So the cavemen that learned to stay away from snakes are the ones that passed on their genes, and that's why so many of us are afraid of snakes for no reason. Well, there is reason, but not because they've had interactions with them themselves. So I think personally, myself, when it comes to reptiles or any somewhat dangerous animal, I think it's more important to not treat how you interact with them or handle them out of fear, but I think it's important to learn about them and base how you handle them out of respect. So instead of killing a snake because you're scared of it, you would find a way to relocate that snake out of the way that you want it to be, because you respect it. So we just came to a park. You can technically go herping most places, depending on the weather. If it's warm out and the sun's out, you're typically going to find snakes or other reptiles like that. We chose one of the sunnier days in Minnesota this week, although you can tell it's pretty cloudy nonetheless. But yeah, you can go herping anywhere, but we're deciding to go into this park here because this is a area where you typically see a lot of garter snakes. So hopefully we find some out here. One of the things that if you're going to go deep herping, like going through the bushes, you want to have the correct tools with you. And by tools, I just mean clothing and a water bottle. So for instance, you don't want to go herping in open-toed sandals and short shorts, because if you run into the wrong thing and it gets you at the leg, then your leg has no protection. So shoes, closed-toed, and long pants that are typically thick is what you need. Let's see what we can find. When going out and herping or looking for anything out in the wild, it's important to do some research ahead of time. We're up in cold Minnesota, so we're not going to have any like Everglades where we're going to find Burmese pythons, but we do have snakes like garter snakes or fox snakes, or even the occasional hognose if we're lucky, and they tend to be in these very grassy plains around here. So it's important to know where you need to look first. Another thing that anybody that's out looking for animals uses, whether they know what that is or not, is this idea of what's called a search image. And a search image is basically like, you imagine like a silhouette of the thing you're looking for, and then you start scanning the area for it and things will suddenly fit into that. It's something that you learn to do over time, but when you go out into nature, you learn pretty quickly that things aren't going to come running out to you and go, hey, look at me, pick me up. Now, speaking of picking things up, if you're going to do that, one of the main tips I would say is you need to be a little confident. If you're going to pick a snake up to move it to a different location and you go up really shaky or timid, or you're poking it and doing it like that, this isn't calm for you and it's not calm for the animal. The only thing you're doing to the snake or other animal that you're doing this to is agitating it, which is not a thing you want to do with a possible dangerous animal. You want to be confident, you want to scoop it up. It might bite you still, but at least it's not going to freak out at you. And then you simply move it to another area. And hopefully we'll be able to find something so I can demonstrate doing that. Alright, so we're out here in this field. And fun thing about garter snakes is they tend to brumate over the winter, which means that they'll go and they'll find a hole or they'll dig a hole and they will stay in there the whole winter, and then they'll come out around mid-March to April, and it's currently the beginning of April, so they're all probably out looking for mates. But we see here, this is a hole right here, and there's a bunch more over here. Now this was possibly dug by either some type of rodent or a snake itself, although this going straight down, I assume it's a rodent. But it's very likely that snakes were living in this at some point. Alright, so here's the first sign that snakes are for sure in this area. This is a shed snake skin, and by the size of the scales, this is not a garter snake, so we can assume that this is some type of a fox snake. So we know we're in the right area.
Go.
Alright, so it took us about an hour and a half, but we finally found a group of little garter snakes. The rest of them scurried off here, but I was able to get my hands on one of them. So this is I believe a plains garter snake. Which you can tell from the stripes of yellow on his belly and the stripes on the side and on the top. As you can see, he's pretty much completely calm. I've been holding him for about a minute now, and he calmed down pretty quick. I think he pooped on me a little, which is natural for snakes. They do this thing called musking, where they poop, and it's very stinky. And it's kind of a deterrent to predators to go, hey, you don't want to eat me, I smell terrible. But yeah, one of the main important things when looking for snakes or any dangerous creature is one simple rule, and that is, if you don't know what the animal is, do not interact with it physically at all. So up in Minnesota, we don't really typically have to worry about venomous snakes much. The only one that we have up here is a rattlesnake. And venomous snakes like that, and most venomous snakes will alert you to their position before you'll even get close to them, so they make themselves known, whereas these guys are pretty quiet. Aren't you, buddy? Oh, I know, I'm big and scary. But yeah, so he's pretty calm now, and I think this was a pretty good find, and I think we'll let him go now. I'm getting to know you, buddy. There you go. Go have fun finding a girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever. That was a pretty successful herping situation. We saw a good amount of fun stuff out there. We saw the snake skins, which proved that there's either some type of a fox, bull, or gopher snake out there, which is pretty cool. And then finding the actual snakes was awesome. It's actually pretty often when you go out searching for stuff like that, that you'll search for like 2 hours and you won't find anything. And you do your best to not let that get you down. You go, next time we'll find some. But finding them right at the end there was pretty cool. It was pretty cool actually coming across them there, because we walked up to them and I saw one of them and I went to grab them, and 5 of them all scurried up from that same area, which means that they were doing this thing that garter snakes do, which is called forming like a mating ball, where like anywhere from like 4 to 20 of them just get to this huge ball and just go nuts and mate. And that's pretty common at this time of the year. So it was really cool to kind of get there right at the beginning of that and be able to grab one of the bigger ones, which pretty sure was a female, which is super cool. So today we went out into the natural habitat and I showed you guys where you might be able to find some snakes or avoid them if that is what you're looking to do. We went and saw some snake holes, some snake skin, and then finally found some snakes and got to teach some things about those garter snakes that we found. Snakes aren't that dangerous as a whole. There are only a few in the United States that are lethally venomous, and most of the venomous ones will only cause some allergic reactions, bad but not lethal. In fact, in the US, only around 5 to 6 people die a year from envenomations from snakes, and you're actually 9 times more likely to be struck by lightning than you are to be bitten and killed by a snake. I think it's really important to learn about these animals that you might be afraid of, and learn to respect them, and learn how to handle yourself around them so that it doesn't become a sort of bad situation where you or the animal could get hurt. And I think you're getting a little close to the table there, bud. Okay. I think it's just good to spread that knowledge in general so that we can learn to protect and conserve these species and do better for them than we have in the past. Thank you for watching.